The peace of Christ be with you. This is a Midweek Reflection for May 20th. Throughout these, I have shared that I try to spend as much time in nature as I can to maintain a healthy balance in my life. Alongside home and work, and especially when things are stressful, finding that space in wild and beautiful places is really important for my well-being. And throughout this pandemic, that's mostly taken the shape of fly fishing in the Rogue River near Rockford. Times of the year where I'm doing a lot of that, I tend to geek out on the website for the United States Geological Survey. They have a page where they share real-time data from their river monitoring stations all around the state. So especially this spring, as I've been working to get my boys on the water with me, I've paid close attention to the charts for cubic feet per second discharge and for height. Over the years, I've just kind of built up enough experience to know where on those charts I feel safe wading, where it starts to get sketchy, and where it's just not safe for me to be in the water anymore. And I'm gaining that knowledge for the kids too. But on every height chart on that page, there's a red line that marks flood stage. For the Rogue, that's 8 feet. And once the graph climbs above that, it's no longer just unsafe for me to step into it. It becomes unsafe for everything around it as water spills out over the bank and threatens damage. And if you've done any leadership development work with me over the years where we talk about systems theory, that might sound like my good friend, the anxiety bucket. The anxiety bucket works like this. Every one of us is individuals, and every system that we're a part of, which means your nuclear family in your home, your extended family, a congregation, a staff at workplace, a school that you're a part of, all of those have a certain carrying capacity for anxiety. And each of us as individuals and the systems that we're a part of have a certain level of chronic anxiety that's always in the system. If it's a fairly healthy individual or system, that level of chronic anxiety might be fairly low. But if it's an unhealthy one, where there's a lot of conflict or trauma or disruptive change, over time, there comes to just be a chronic level of anxiety that gets you closer to your carrying capacity. Just on a daily basis, you're closer to the top of that bucket. Now, the trick is when stressors from the outside begin adding more anxiety into the bucket. So let's say we have a fairly healthy family, has a fairly low level of chronic anxiety, and then something from the outside adds in. Like, let's say a pandemic that shuts down the economy and closes schools and disrupts everything in your life. That's going to add in quite a bit of additional anxiety. And then let's say that one of the income earners gets laid off. That's going to add in another amount of anxiety. And then maybe you hear that somebody you love and really care about has tested positive for the virus, and it adds in still more. Well, you're starting to get up to the carrying capacity for anxiety in that family system. But because the chronic level of anxiety was fairly low, you can hold it. But if you take that same amount of anxiety and try to add it into a system that already had a high chronic level of anxiety, well, then there's just nowhere for it to go. And pretty quickly, you're going to hit capacity, and that's going to start to spill over. And when that happens, we tend to see really unhealthy and at times destructive patterns. They follow what we call the fight, flight, or freeze responses. So maybe once you've surpassed your carrying capacity for anxiety, there starts to be more fighting, more yelling, more passive-aggressive behavior that erodes trust. Or maybe for you, it's the flight response, and either physically or emotionally, you start to distance yourself from that system and the others in it, or even distancing from your own spirit. That's also where we see addictive patterns start to show up, where you turn to things to help you numb that anxiety that you're experiencing. Or it might be the freeze response, where you just literally feel incapacitated. It could turn into depression, or it could turn into symptoms in your body where migraines or other physical ailments just kind of shut you down. So what do we do when we recognize that that anxiety is spilling over? Well, there's only two ways to get that anxiety back contained. One is to lower the amount of anxiety that's in the system. So that might mean that you talk to a counselor or a trusted friend to name what it is you're going through. It might mean you commit yourself to some new practices of prayer where you sit with God and talk about the stressors that are impacting your life. It might mean that you, if you have diagnosable anxiety disorder, work with some medication to help bring that down. Or it might mean that you take concrete steps towards action to address the stressors that are adding anxiety. So, if you've been laid off and you're not sure if you are eligible for unemployment, taking that first step to explore it. Or if there's some pride that keeps you from seeking help from the benevolence fund at church, just making that first phone call, something tangible to create forward movement. All of that can lower the anxiety that is within the system. Get it back under containment. But the really significant and often harder work over time is that we can work to build a bigger bucket. And there are a lot of things that we can do that add to that carrying capacity for anxiety in our own lives and in the systems that we're a part of. But often it's hard work. It might mean prolonged work with a counselor to explore those patterns of anxiety in your own life or patterns in your family of origin that taught you certain ways to respond to anxiety. It might mean working with personality tools like the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs to just figure out how you're wired and how the people you're in systems with are wired and how those work together and how they don't work together so well. It might mean working with a spiritual director or a mentor in the faith who helps you grow a deeper awareness of your unique God-given sense of identity. All of those things help increase emotional, spiritual, and relational maturity that gives you a higher carrying capacity for the anxiety that is inevitable in our lives and in the communities that we are a part of. So, hopefully that's helpful for you because we are in some stressful and anxiety-producing times. As I'm talking, you might already be able to recognize what the chronic level of anxiety is within your own spirit or within the systems that you're a part of. You might be able to name the outside stressors that add anxiety into the bucket. You might even be able to recognize and name some of your own patterns for when that anxiety hits the carrying capacity and starts to spill over. For me, that's work that feels really valuable. And as a pastor, I love exploring those things with people because I think that the health of the systems we're a part of increases when we as individuals within those systems increase our own carrying capacity for anxiety, where we do that good, hard work of increasing emotional, spiritual, and relational maturity. So this week, I would love it if you would take some time to maybe reflect on this analogy and these themes in your own life and in the systems that you're a part of. Maybe talk with your family, other people who know you well and can give you honest feedback about what they recognize in your life. And if you would be so brave to share in the comments below where you've recognized anxiety in your own life and the systems you're a part of, how you've maybe learned to lower anxiety or increase your emotional, spiritual, relational capacity for holding it, and to tell some of those stories about how you have grown over the years so that maybe we can learn together and help share some different tools to manage the anxiety that we all inevitably experience. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to share about the anxiety bucket.